the unselfish concern for the well-being of others. It involves acting out of a genuine desire to help others, without expecting any personal reward, recognition, or reciprocal benefit in return. Imagine witnessing a child struggling in a rushing river. Instinct overrides intellect. You plunge into the water and pull them to safety. Society immediately labels this a heroic act of pure altruism. But if we slow down the tape and examine the psychological machinery behind your choice, a more unsettling question emerges. Who were you actually saving? Were you acting solely out of concern for the child's survival? Or was your brain executing a swift self-serving calculation to rescue yourself from the crushing lifelong agony of bystander guilt? And what if it was for the sake of the child and not guilt? What would that truly look like? A feeling of dread that the child might drown under your watch? The compulsion to save in that situation comes from that fear. Empathy? Without being able to put yourself in that child's shoes, you might never be able to act out of empathy, as it emphasizes you being in such a situation. Or is it compassion? Compassion starts and stops with your feelings, and the need to relieve another's suffering, as the understanding of the term suggests, is still a selfish feeling because the discomfort that compels you to act lies within you. What then is truly altruistic? For centuries, thinkers have wrestled with this moral paradox. When we peel back the comforting layers of our societal narratives, the view becomes deeply uncomfortable. We are forced to confront a troubling possibility that every act of historical sacrifice or daily kindness might simply be a sophisticated mechanism for personal distress relief. If our grandest gesture of love and charity are fundamentally designed to manage our internal discomfort, we must seriously question whether altruism, in its purest definition, is a literal impossibility. From childhood, we are fed a binary narrative of human morality. We are taught that the world is neatly divided into heroes and villains, givers and takers, the benevolent and the selfish, the good and the bad. It's a comforting framework, but it collapses under serious analysis. When we observe human behavior closely, we find that every single choice must pass through an absolute bottleneck, the human ego. Consider the mechanics of our most celebrated actions. We do not extend help in a vacuum. We do it because the act generates a chemical or psychological reward within us. We donate to charities to reinforce a curated, flattering image of our own identity. We rush to comfort a grieving stranger, not through some magical connection, but because witnessing their raw distress triggers a mirroring response in our own brains that we find intolerable. Even when we choose apathy, we are simply prioritizing the preservation of our own time, energy, or safety. The self is an inescapable variable in every moral equation. Therefore, framing selfishness as a moral failing misses the mark entirely. The real inquiry we must brave is not whether our motives are self-serving, but whether our psychological wiring even allows for any other mode of existence. Consider the act of anonymous charity, the supposedly flawless proof of pure selflessness. You give secretly, no public accolades follow, no social capital is gained. To the casual observer, you have extracted nothing from the transaction, yet the internal data tells a completely different story. Even in total isolation, the benefactor experiences a distinct surge of psychological satisfaction. This phenomenon is not mystical, it is biochemical. Neurologists and psychologists refer to this neurochemical reward system as the helper's high. When we alleviate another person's suffering, our brains reward us with a potent cocktail of dopamine and oxytocin. This reality forces us to look past the surface of our own behavior. If an anonymous act of kindness triggering an internal chemical payoff is what drives us, then the transaction is never truly one-sided. The recipient gets the aid, but you get the high. We must then ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Is anonymous charity a pure sacrifice, or is it simply a sophisticated form of self-medication? Nature is an uncompromising accountant. It rarely tolerates a waste of energy. From a strict evolutionary standpoint, Complex behaviors do not persist by accident. They endure because they actively drive survival and reproductive success. When a parent makes a painful sacrifice for a child, they are not acting out of a vacuum of pure altruism. They are protecting their own genetic payload, ensuring their DNA outlives them. This transactional logic extends to a wider social network. We extend help to friends because reciprocal altruism functions as an insurance policy. We build cohesive cooperative communities because history has proven that isolated organisms perish while mutual support networks survive. What we fondly label as human kindness is often just a highly optimized, evolutionary, successful survival strategy. It is not that self-interest has been conquered or replaced by morality. Rather, self-interest has simply evolved a far more sophisticated, socially acceptable disguise. We arrive at the most challenging counter-argument, the fatal sacrifice. Consider the firefighter who breaches a collapsing burning structure to rescue strangers, losing their life in the process. At first glance, this seems to shatter our thesis. A person cannot enjoy a psychological payoff or an evolutionary advantage if they are dead. Yet, if we examine the psychological landscape of the individual, a deeper compulsion reveals itself. Over a lifetime of conditioning and personal alignment, this person's core identity has become entirely fused with the role of the protector. For an individual in this state, the option to walk away is not a viable choice. To abandon those trapped inside would inflict a catastrophic, unlivable injury to their concept of self. They are not faced with a simple choice between their own life and the lives of strangers. They are choosing between physical expiration and psychological annihilation. In their final moment, the mind chooses to preserve the integrity of its identity at any cost. Even in the act of dying, the self remains the ultimate author of the decision. We arrive at the ultimate boundary of this psychological maze, which we can explore through a final thought experiment. Attempt to conceptualize a purely selfless act. Strip away every layer of external reward. No public validation, no legacy, no quiet nod of appreciation from another human being. Now go deeper. Strip away every internal transaction as well. Remove the chemical warmth of the helper's high. Remove the relief of avoided guilt. Erase any sense of cosmic alignment, personal fulfillment, or adherence to your own moral values. Imagine acting in a vacuum where the deed provides absolutely nothing to your psychological well-being. Would the impulse to act still exist? And if an individual claimed they performed the deed under these exact conditions, we encounter an insurmountable barrier of verification. How could anyone ever prove that a hidden subconscious motivation did not tilt the scales? We cannot. The concept of pure altruism functions as an untestable hypothesis, a comforting phantom that dissolves the moment we subject it to rigorous scrutiny. The discomfort we feel when confronting these mechanics stems from a fundamental error in our framing. We have been conditioned to view self-interest and benevolence as an irreconcilable dichotomy, a zero-sum game where one must die for the other to live. But what if they were never opposites to begin with? Consider the parent who protects their child out of profound love. The child survives and the parent fulfills a deep biological imperative. It is undeniably a transaction where both parties benefit. Does acknowledging the parent's psychological payoff diminish the reality of that love? Only if we adhere to a toxic, unrealistic standard of purity. When we break free from this binary trap, we can begin to see cooperation not as a moral failure of selfishness, but as a beautifully optimized system of mutual benefit. True psychological health doesn't require us to obliterate the self. It requires us to align our self-interest with the well-being of others. Love, kindness, and sacrifice do not lose their value just because they make sense for our survival. In fact, that might be exactly what makes them so profoundly real. So where does this leave us? Is altruism merely a convenient fiction we tell ourselves to mask our inherent selfishness? Or is it that our understanding of human nature has been artificially constricted by the systems around us? Perhaps the pursuit of a completely detached, selfless act is a misguided quest. If we accept the reality of our psychological and biological wiring, caring for others is not the antithesis of self-care, it is an extension of it. The most profound acts of human kindness are not those manufactured in a vacuum of self-denial. Rather, they are the moments where our internal world becomes so deeply integrated with the well-being of another person that our interests become entirely inseparable from theirs. We don't need to fear the presence of the self in our moral choices. Instead, we begin to question the motives of any system or ideology that demands we obliterate our self-interest to be deemed good. As we close this exploration, I leave you with a question to sit with. Can a human being ever operate entirely outside the gravity of the self? Or is the realization that we are fundamentally connected by mutual benefit the very thing that allows us to build a genuinely empathetic world? We are, in the end, prisoners of ourselves. Every kindness that softens another's sorrow, every hand stretched toward the broken, every sacrifice draped in virtue, whether born from compassion or performed beneath the gaze of applauding eyes, springs from the same hidden well, the desire to satisfy the self. There is no gift that does not seek return, no holy fire that does not wish to burn. Behind the grace, the pity, and the sigh, altruism is a lie.